Hi Prof, we are Group 5 and today we'll be going through our perspectives on global nutrition and happiness based on the data analytics that we've conducted. Our group consists of Shaurya, Danya, Anushri, Bharat, Rohit and myself. Next slide. The key areas we'll be covering are firstly, nutrient intake versus happiness, dietary correlations. Next, processed and fast food consumption impacts, and then followed by long-term dietary trends and policy recommendations. Next slide. We'll start off with question 16. Do countries with higher average protein and fat intake during winter months tend to report higher happiness? If you take a look at the graph on the left, the x-axis is ordered from the higher happiness ranking to the lower happiness ranking, meaning that the United States is the highest has the highest happiness rank in the dataset, and India has the lowest happiness rank in the dataset. Across these countries, you'll find that there is a downward decreasing trend for both average protein intake and average fat intake. This means that countries with higher average and protein and fat intake during winter months do tend to report higher happiness. Now you'll notice that Brazil is a slight outlier, and this is because the winter months were actually taken as an assumption to be December, January, and February, because these are the winter months for every country in that dataset except for Brazil. And that's why Brazil stands as a slight outlier to the generally decreasing trend observed. Next slide.
Next, we are asked to observe whether there are any correlations between long-term fat intake trends and happiness. So as we can see in this graph here, this shows for each country the average fat intake and happiness, which is scaled to a value between 0 and 1. The average fat intake was found by computing the average across all of the years, and the happiness score was found for 2015. As we can see here, the graph shows the top 20, middle 20, and bottom 20 for each country, and the countries with higher happiness tend to have higher fat intake, and countries with lower fat intake have lower happiness. So this appears to be a linear kind of relationship. So why is this the case? Well, it could potentially be a third variable that affects both fat intake and happiness. Next slide. As we can see in this scatter plot, there's a strong linear relationship, and the correlation value gives 0.7, which is a strong positive correlation. We can also tell from tests that the correlation is statistically significant. So as mentioned previously, it's potentially a third variable like income that affects both fat intake and happiness. And we can validate this because higher income countries tend to have higher fat intake and higher happiness, and lower income countries have lower fat intake and happiness. In fact, the top 10 countries with highest fat intake and happiness have greater income than 93% of rest of the countries. And the bottom 10 countries with lowest fat intake and happiness have lower income than the rest of 87% of the countries. Next slide.
Okay, so now for the next question, are countries with lower monthly nutrient variation happier? The analysis uses the intake data set, but only the year 2015 was selected, so it matches with the 2015 happiness data. Then the daily calorie values were converted into the monthly totals, and a single nutrient variation score was calculated for each country using the monthly protein, fat, and the carbohydrate values. Next, this scatter plot shows the nutrient variation on the x-axis and the happiness on the y-axis. The regression line slopes slightly downwards and the correlation is minus 0.275. This means the relationship is quite weak, which means that countries with more stable nutrient intake tend to be a little happier, but the points are widely spread. Countries with similar variation can have very different happiness scores, and some high variation countries still report strong happiness. This shows that diet stability alone cannot explain national well being because other factors like income, food security, and healthcare play a major role. Next slide. The second graph uses the same information but scales both nutrient variation and happiness scores between 0 and 1 so that they can be compared more clearly. After sorting all the countries by variation, the top 20, middle 20, and the bottom 20 were selected. The paired bars show a clearer pattern. High variation countries appear more often at the lower end of the happiness, and low variation countries appear more often at the higher end. The middle group, however, shows a mix of values which confirms the weak relationship. Overall, both graphs show the same conclusion. More stable nutrient intake aligns with higher happiness, but the connection is small and mainly reflects wider national conditions rather than diet alone. Next slide. So, in summary, for the part nutrient intake versus happiness, We found these key insights. First, countries with higher average protein/fat intake during winter months do tend to report higher happiness. Second, there is positive relationship between fat intake and happiness score, and there might be a third variable, income, which affects both of these values. Third, countries with more stable monthly nutrient intake show only a weak link to higher happiness. Many countries do not follow this pattern strictly. Next slide.
So moving on to 19th question. Is there any relationship between processed food intake and fast food menu? So to answer this question, we took the daily nutrition intake data set and we found the average intake of protein, fat, and carbohydrates for India and UK. And we also sourced two other data sets, which included McDonald's menu for UK and India. And we found the average protein, carbs, and fat in those menus. And from the graph on the left, we can see that UK population consumes more protein and fat than the Indian population. And from the table on the right, we can see that UK menu items are higher in protein and fats. So this could imply that the menu composition is not random at all, but may be influenced by the nutritional preferences and habits of the particular region it serves, therefore boosting the intake of processed food. Next slide. So what can be the impact of processed food and fast food consumption on happiness? So to answer this question, we took data from the year 2015 because that's what was used for the happiness rank, and we took specific countries such as the top 5 countries for the happiness rank and few random selected countries from the bottom. And we also found the ultra processed food intake in relation to the percentage of total energy for each country, and the result shows that countries with higher intake of ultra-processed food often rank higher on the happiness index. However, there's an exception of Switzerland. So this indicates that other factors also play a significant role in determining happiness. Another implication of this could be that developed countries tend to have greater availability of fast food outlets and processed food, reflecting both economic prosperity and higher disposable income. And what about health outcomes? So then we selected few countries from the table above, such as Norway, Denmark, Italy, and France, which all fall in the same region to minimize the impact of other variables. And from the table, we can conclude that higher UPA consumption does not necessarily correspond to a lower life expectancy, as the values are quite high. However, countries with lower UPF intake tend to have slightly better health outcomes. Next slide.
So for the next question, does fast food consumption increase health risk and could the risk be mitigated? So to do this, we started a scoring table based on macronutrient thresholds recommended by the WHO, US FDA, and other authorities. For each meal in McDonald's and Burger King, we will label each macronutrient risk. And if it falls outside of the healthy, moderate ranges, the meal will be labeled unhealthy. So ultimately, each meal is given a health risk score from 0 to 7, a combination of each macronutrient risk that is present. So here we only compared McDonald's and Burger King to standardize the meal comparisons. Starbucks menu have smaller serving sizes as they are mostly bakery or snacks. So this won't be a fair comparison as they are not average meal proportion size. So what we found is that 75% of the meals, 3 out of every 4 fast food meals carry at least one nutritional risk. And if you see the table on the right, protein deficiency was the most common risk at 39% of the meals, followed by sodium, reflecting the fast food's high salt content. So for the next part, understanding the risk mitigation, we simulated risk mitigation by creating adjusted health risk scores, lowering the highest risk items by 2 points to reflect healthier nutrient levels. So this demonstrated that modifying menu choices can substantially reduce the share of high-risk fast food items, as you can see from the table on the left. So the large number of meals shifted down to the 1 to 2 range in the mitigated data set. And as you can see in McDonald's, many of their items scored 1 to 2, but after mitigation, a substantial portion moved into the 0 to 1 range, which is obviously healthier. So on the table on the right, mitigation showed significant percentage drops, and here again, McDonald's achieved complete elimination of all highest risk items just by reducing the health risk scores. So for the next part, due to the lack of health outcome metrics in existing data sets, we decided to look into this obesity data set that can help understand fast food consumption effect on obesity health risk. So first we did a Kramer's correlation analysis, and we found that fast food consumption has a moderate association with obesity class at a correlation of 0.39. And if, as you can see on the table on the right, overweight and obese, which are classes 3 and 4, tend to consume more fast food than healthy individuals.
Next slide. So, processed and fast food consumption impacts. Talking about that, so the countries with higher UPF intake often score higher on happiness, but lower UPF countries show slightly better health outcomes. UPF intake is also not the only main driver of well-being. Social support, healthcare, and stability matter more as well. And wealthier countries have greater UPF and fast food availability, hence increasing overall exposure to processed foods. So, what are the impacts of fast food consumption? 75% of fast food meals carry nutritional risk, and health risks can be significantly reduced if nutrients were controlled to a healthy range. Fast food intake is moderately associated with obesity. Overweight and obese groups consume generally more fast food than healthy weight individuals. Next slide. So our next question is: are there any notable nutritional shifts in the United States, and what can be the explanation? So for this, there was we conducted an analysis on of dietary intake data from 1977 to 2018, which revealed several notable long-term nutritional shifts in the United States. These patterns reflect major changes in food availability, lifestyle, socioeconomic conditions, and broader cultural preferences. So as you can see on the left, the average daily energy intake increased by approximately 15.8%. And what could be the plausible explanation of this and impact of this increase in energy intake could be the declining physical activity and the increasing obesity rates in the United States, which are an outcome of increased imbalance, where expenditure has declined more sharply than the intake, which has increased. So, talking about the fat intake, we can observe that the fat intake has also increased significantly by 100 to 200% in the case of food away from home, and it has decreased from food at home. So, observation on the fat intake supports the argument that Americans increasingly have been relying on convenient, highly palatable, fat dense foods outside the home. The next slide. So, between 1977 and 2018, increased caloric intake from fast food over restaurants reflects profound structural and cultural changes that have taken place in the American food environment, as you can see from the histogram plot on the left-hand side. That fast food calories consumed from fast food restaurants as compared to normal restaurants, there has seen a threefold increase. And fast food chains have expanded aggressively, and they have become more cheaper, faster, and more accessible, and energy dense over time. And if we see from a macronutrient perspective, nutrient shift analysis shows that the dietary transition has not been driven by protein intake increase, but by higher intake of refined carbohydrates, added sugars, fat dense processed foods, and larger portions. Next slide. So next question is about what months should governments increase public awareness of unhealthy food spikes. So for that, we analyzed the food outlet sales in Singapore, particularly focusing on fast food sales. And ranking the average fast food sales by month, we observed that December and August were the winners and showed consistent seasonal spikes with secondary increases in July and November. So, what is the plausible explanation for this? Is that combination of is a combination of seasonal behavior, economic incentives, and social patterns that influence consumer spending. Like there's a boost of tourism around July and August, which takes place in Singapore, and the high spikes in August can be attributed to the National Day celebrations and the giving away of CDC vouchers. And the holiday promotions and festive trends around December can also be correlated to high fast food spikes. And as you can see on the bottom left, the analysis of the months to raise government awareness campaign. So what exactly this table tells us that August, December, the average sales were the above 1.4% the total average sales across all the months, and hence these months have been flagged as high priority, calling for are high priority months where government actions is needed in terms of campaigning. Next slide. So, what healthy fast food options can be introduced? And so, to answer that question, the data set shows that on the left hand side, we analyzed the fast food nutrition menu and their nutritional composition. So, the data set showed that generally healthy fast food choices are still limited. So, they were ranked on the basis of a health score, which negatively weighted uh, food with high amount of fat, sodium, and sugar. So the lower the health rank and the lower the score, the better is the particular item. So a few categories have consistently performed better in terms of the score, which include grilled chicken sandwiches, bean burritos, and baked slash non-fried sides. This shows that current menus offer very few with balanced meals, as you can see from the bottom left table, which show a percentage breakdown of the three macronutrients: protein, fats, and carbs, and hence requires for us to improve the public health options in terms. Fast food chains should allow an expanded number of offerings in terms of grilled protein bowls, whole grain wraps, which are much healthier and balanced options, and which are minimally processed meals. Next slide.
So for the next question, we studied the impact of reduction of fat or sugar-based diets on the three outcomes, and we suggested policy recommendations. So we analyzed country-level happiness, health, and economic data alongside the daily macronutrient intake to assess how the dietary changes affect the well-being. So we simulated a 20% reduction in animal protein, vegetable protein, fats, and carbs, to estimate the impacts on these outcomes. So correlation between the nutrients and outcomes were calculated, and average global changes were used to approximate the expected effects. So what we found is that reducing fat and sugar overall improves happiness, health, and economic outcomes. So for example, a 20% of this reduction showed 112 units increase in economic, and also 142.6 increase when carbs is reduced. So this increase in outcome is consistently seen in happiness and health as well. So this provides strong justification for implementing targeted dietary policies to improve all three outcomes. So we suggest explicit and implicit strategies. And as part of our explicit policies, we can include sugar taxes and mandatory low sugar options, which can target high risk fast food consumption that spikes during promotions. So these are the evidences, and we can also provide subsidies or vouchers for healthy foods. As for implicit strategies, it can involve public awareness campaigns to educate about nutritional risk at school or workplace. Next.
So the long-term dietary trends that we have found was that reducing fat and sugar improves all three of the outcomes. There is a growing reliance on convenient, fat-dense food eaten outside the home. Calories from fast food increased sharply over the year due to cheaper, more accessible options. And lastly, Singapore fast food sales show seasonal spikes from July to August and November to December due to tourism, voucher, promotion, and festive spending. So the policy we recommend is first of all strategically steering consumption towards lower fat, lower sugar options, and combination of explicit and implicit policies.
So we'd like to conclude our presentation with a few key insights. Firstly, higher intake of protein and fat in wealthier countries correlates to higher happiness scores, but these relationships are driven by socioeconomic factors. Fast food and processed food patterns also show meaningful links to health outcomes. Menu comparisons reveal that fast food offerings reflect and enforce regional dietary habits, while ultra-processed food intake tends to be highest in developed high happiness countries. Health scoring shows that the most fast food meals exceed recommended thresholds for calories, sodium, or unhealthy fats, and simulation results show that even small nutrient reductions are crucial. Modeling of macronutrient reduction suggests that decreasing fat and sugar intake yields substantial predicted improvements in happiness, health, and economic outcomes. These results support the use of explicit policies and implicit strategies to improve population well-being. Overall, the findings highlight that diet, health, and happiness are interlinked but heavily shaped by economic and environmental factors, and that well-designed policies targeting nutrition can yield broad societal benefits. Thank you.